Yeah, you can be the greatest, you can be the best, you can be the King Kong banging on your chest, you can beat the world.
Coming up next on Blast from the Past, it's the great Peter Geddes. Yeah, Peter Geddes, what a gentleman Peter Geddes is. I mean, a worthy winner of a Liston Trophy. He, down at this club rooms, nothing seemed to bother Peter. He was always enthusiastic, always happy, always smiling, and he put his heart and soul into a game of football every time he played. He'd give it everything. He'd put his body at risk. He'd be a beautiful tap ruckman. He made Brian Jones look like a superstar. Peter Geddes, ladies and gentlemen.
I started my career actually a little late, so when I was during my mid-teens I had growing pains in my knee. It's called Osgood Slatters, and so I didn't play till I was 17, and that was at Edithvale Aspendale in the under-18s there. Went down for 2 years, so played in 74, 75. Coaches were Toll Gale, and then a coach came, Ken Ross, and that was in 75. Ken was an ex-Fitzroy player. Interestingly, he'd won the Liston Trophy in 1957, playing for Camberwell, the year I was born. So his son was playing in our team, and so he was a very, very knowledgeable coach and really helped us, all as young guys. And that was a great year, 75, and we won the Premiership that year. And I think I picked up the best in Fairest, and at the end of the year, Stan Alves came down and started to talk to some of the players about going to Melbourne to play in the under-19s. And so I took the invitation, and in 76 found myself doing pre-season with Melbourne under-19s, which was fantastic, and met a lot of guys there. Neil Crompton was our coach, so he was a Melbourne legend. And that year was a good year. I don't think we made the finals. I won the best in Fairest in the under-19s, and so I played a couple of reserves games, and then in 77 I got put on the sub list for the senior team. And actually the coach at the time was Frank Davis, and Bob Skilton was the senior coach there. But I only lasted half a year, and then by then they decided that they'd cut me and you know, send me adrift, and they'd offered to help me find a club. But I went and visited a few. Actually, I went back to have a chat to EDS and a chat to Sandringham, and then my dad's mate was John Thatcher, who was part of the Frankston Football Club committee at the time, and so Dad said to me, I'll go down to Frankston and have a go there. So I only came down one training night, but I was pretty impressed. Ray Davies was the coach, and Ian Shepherd was on the committee. I remember him, you know, taking me across the road for a beer and a steak after training, and you know, asking me to come down and play for Frankston. So I did that in halfway through 77, and just played the rest of the year out. Had really good ruckmen in that team. Had Vaughan Ellis and Jeff Kaiser and John Locko. So we already had really good ruckmen. So I played in the back pocket next to Lyle Hendrickson, who was the full back at the time. But at the end of 77, then a lot of those players left. I think, as people know, the club got into financial trouble and a whole change came across. And that's when Brian Mace came in and coached, and you know, history says that a fantastic team was put together with some, you know, great recruits in Ray Orchard and Alan Harper, and some good players from the young group around Frankston. So Macy and Ian Roberts and Brian Jones and myself, Arthur Bell, you know, there was quite a lot of young guys, Graham Membray coming into the team. So young guys came in, and we had a great year, and that's for another story, I guess, the year of 78. then we were promoted to First Division, so that was great. And so that was, from 79 through to 87. I stayed here at Frankston, played in First Division, had lots of coaches, because I think in the first 4 years I had 5 coaches, because in 1980 we had 2, 79 we had Chris Pavlo, and then we had Frank Davis, who'd coached me at Melbourne Reserves, came and coached in 1980, so that was great. But then he only lasted half a year, and Ian Bremner took over, which, to have someone of his stature coaching was fantastic. And then we had Swamp Fox Patterson and Billy Barrett from 82, 83, 81. Swamp Fox came. That was fantastic. We made the finals under Mike, and so that was a real turnaround. We started to see ourselves as a legitimate, successful First Division team. And then Josh arrived in 84, and that was, really good for us, because by then we had faith, and Josh was a very thorough coach and a very studied coach, and so we rallied well behind him, and lots of players came to the club, and we obviously had a really good year there in 84. Started patchy, but towards the end of the year we won 9 games in a row to make the finals, and ended up making the grand final, and started well, and then it all went a bit pear-shaped after about halfway through the first quarter. We started with the enthusiasm, I guess, that we'd had in those 9 games, but then came unstuck and finished with, a pretty ordinary grand final that we played. But when you reflect on it as a year for Frankston, it was important, because it sort of established us as, we're able to make it. And I was captain that year, and actually I was captain also in 81, which was interesting. I was captain for 1 year, and then at the end of that, they thought maybe I was a bit too young, and so I was, put on the sidelines. But when Josh came in, he was able to reappoint me as captain, and I was probably ready for it by then as well. So that was a great year, 84, and that was, lucky enough to win the Liston, and playing with the VFA team. They were just real Helicon days. 85, 86 with Josh still, we would make finals, and there were VFA rep teams that, quite a few players were starting to play in now, and so Frankston was establishing itself as a real First Division team. And then in 87, Jeff Saru coached, which was great. Puppy was, real enthusiastic, the sort of guy that you want to follow. And we made the finals that year. That was my final year at Frankston. At the end of 87, Simon Meehan, who was one of our players, convinced me to go to Darwin with him for the summer season. So I went up with Scraps, Simon Meehan, and played for Waratah Warriors. And that was that summer of 87, 88. And then when I was up there, I actually got a call from Buck Lineker from Maffra Footy Club, and they'd invited me to come and be an assistant coach at Maffra. And so I took that opportunity, and we recruited Daryl Cunningham to come and coach us. That was great. And then we were lucky, we got Brian Jones came up from Frankston, Jeff Raven came up from Frankston. So we had a sensational team in 88, 89, and made the grand final, which, for Maffra, I think they'd hardly played in finals, let alone we had in finals for both years, and made a grand final and lost by a point. So it was the most disappointing time for us, but also a bit of a highlight for Maffra to think that they could also make the finals. Then I went and played at Leongatha, so I was at Leongatha for a couple of years, and that would have been 90, 91, and reasonable success there. It missed out again though, played in the grand final, but we were beaten by Traralgon. That was in the same competition. And that's when I decided that it was time to leave the country, maybe, and come home, for want of a better word, and went back to Fairest and played there in 92, 93, 94. We were a struggling team. Fairest was struggling at the time, and so our prime goal was to try to stay in First Division, which, in the Peninsula League they were able to do. So that was really good. And we had, great players, Brett Wright, Teddy Turner, Reece Conlon, there were Butch Dales, there were some, fantastic players that were there, but we probably only had half a dozen of them, and after that we dropped off. When I left Aspendale, I went to Parkdale and ended up, I was there for a few years as coach, but played 1 year. So that was, really good for me. I had a year off. So when I first went there in 95, I didn't play. And then in 96, they were short of a ruckman, and so I did play. And that was great. That was the end of my playing. At the end of the year, I think I played in a grand final at the end of the year. I was 39 years old. It was time. Hang up the boots and give it up. So I think that if people saw me as someone who had a genuine hot go at the footy, because I wasn't an aggressive player by any means, but I was aggressive at the football, and then trying to get the ball out to others, because as a ruckman, that's your greatest asset is, can I get the ball to someone who can do a lot more with it? And I had heaps of players over those 11 years who could do lots of really great things with the footy, so if I can get the ball to them. The other thing, I guess, was, I sort of always prided myself as someone who had optimism, and so trying to share that belief that, we can win, we can play well, we can recover, it'll get better, that sort of stuff. So during the game, I was usually a bit of a talker on the field, and probably at the breaks as well. I really enjoyed trying to get the team together. That to me, because it's a game where I was once told, there's more players on the field in Australian rules football than basically any other competition, certainly any other football competition. Like the gridiron might have lots of players, but they're not all on the field at one time. So you put 18 players on a field at one time, to get them to play as a team is extremely complex thing you're trying to achieve there. And so, I was always really keen at trying to, encourage people to do the right thing by the team and follow coach's instructions, maintain morale, keep positive, keep having a go. Never get to this point where you think you've been beaten, because you've always got another contest to go to. So you go to the next contest, you might win, even if you did get done on the last one. So I was always, trying to G people up. And I imagine if someone was to say that about me, I'd be delighted, because that was what I was trying to do, was to, make sure that we loved the game, because that's one thing that I also did as well. I loved playing the game of football. It's a really great game to play. And so, when you can run, kick, mark, handball, it's messy, you've got to read the play, it's on a huge field, it's rainy one day, it's dry the next. So it's a really great game to play, because it's so challenging. The ball's the wrong shape, so it's just a really challenging game. So I think that I love the game, and I tried to be as enthusiastic and as focused as I could on, let's get the footy, do the right thing, and get it to our teammates. Well, the year of '84, Josh Kendall was appointed coach, and so he came in with a lot of enthusiasm, and we went through pre-season. At the end of pre-season, then he'd appointed me captain, which was great for me. I'd been captain of the club in 1981, and then the 2 years before that, 82, 83, I hadn't been captain. So to have that confidence that now I've sort of, got myself together and able to be captain was fantastic. And so that's where I thought, right, I'll take this season really seriously, as I'd always taken my season seriously, but being captain in particular, I thought, right. And I was ready. I was 27 years old. I'd matured, and I could basically had the confidence that I could, dominate a game of footy. I'd played against all the other ruckmen in First Division for a couple of years, and so I'd started to work them out. And so I had different abilities to what they had. We had big ruckmen, Stretch Annanson, Vic Annanson, big Kim Kershaw at Barry Rounds, and there was just big ruckmen, but I was a little bit smaller, and I could run and I could jump, and so I knew I could base my game around that. So during the year, we probably struggled for the first half of the year. New coach, some new players came in. We're trying to re-establish ourselves. They were the days where if you played in the ruck, you could, you might change for 5 minutes a quarter with the other ruckman, who might be like say a John Kenter or Peter Rogerson, that sort of thing. But I was a bit of a hog, and if I'd get on the ball, then I'd stay on the ball. And the way the game was played, you could do that. I had enough aerobic capacity, so I could run all day, and so I'd try to stay on the ball as long as I could. And Josh was okay with that, so there was no drama there. And then halfway through the year, we got together. It's a bit like 78 actually, and it takes a while for the new team to gel, new coach to gel. But by halfway through the year, yeah, we were fine. We had some really great play, and we won 9 games in a row to get us into the finals. And so during that time, as a ruckman, I used to think to myself, I'm the only player on this team that no one's picking up. All the other players, the full forward would be on the full back, all the halfback flankers would stay, the wingers would stay on each other basically, but as the ruckman, even the ruck rovers would be worried about each other, so they'd run to attack, run to defend. But the ruckman basically would meet at the bounces and then not see each other, because traditionally you'd drop a kick behind play. And so I'd do that, but then I was also trying to be someone that they could link with in the middle of the ground. So that's something I hadn't done a lot before. I'd mostly just played kick behind play. But I was trying now to get the players to, get out on my own and kick the ball to me. So that was good. It really helped me become a bit more like put a little bit of ruck roving into my game. But mostly, yeah, it was in the ruck. I really enjoyed playing in the ruck. I had great players around me at ground level, and so it was. If I could do some good work just to palm the ball out or to punch the ball out, then they would make me look good because they would get it and clear it from the pack. So it all went on, and then coming up to the finals, I knew that we were in good shape. From a Liston Trophy point of view, you sort of forget all that because you're in the final. So the last couple of games of the year, you're so excited because we've gone from middle of the ladder to ending up 4th. And then we won the first semi-final, we played in the preliminary final, and we're heading for the grand final. How good is this? And then of course it was time for the Liston Trophy, which in those days was not the lavish affair that it is now. So it was maybe 20 of us, 20 players from around the competition were invited into VFA House, and that was around probably 5 p.m. Late afternoon on the Monday before the grand final. So I've gone, yeah, that's fine, I'll go in there. Not really, knowing I'd had a good year, but not really thinking that I would I would, poll highly, I expected to get a few votes. So we go in, we're standing up, it's fine, there's some finger food, I think there was a couple of beers, but because we were still playing, I've got a lemonade and a party pies and standing there, and they're slowly going through the count. And I'm looking as though I could be up near the top. And then I thought, in the end, I think I polled, 19 votes, which is not heaps and heaps, but it was enough. And so I win, which is, well done, mate. There's no lavish celebration of it at VFA House. It's just, good. And then I rang Josh Kendall, the coach, and I got rung the club, and then he came to the phone. He wanted to know how I'd gone. I said, I've won, so that's, great. And he's gone, yeah, that's fantastic, well done. And then I said, what do you want me to do? He's gone, well, it's training tonight. I expect you to come down and train. I've gone, I don't know whether I'll be able to get there in time for training, because some people, I'll chat to people here or whatever. He's gone, no, try to get here. I want to see you on the track, so don't just come down. So anyway, I had a chat to a couple of people in at VFA House, and my family, a couple of those had come in to say hi, and then took the drive from Richmond down to Frankston to get here for the last bit of training. And that was probably good. That probably, grounded me back to, what we were about. And then we trained on the Wednesday as well and the Friday as well. And so part of that was, I'm preparing for the game, but then the other thing, occasionally, there'd be, I was a fireman, so I worked in town, and so a reporter rings me up, I want to come to the fire station to do an article on you for the Liston Trophy, and so I'm going, yeah, that's fine, no worries. And you do get that little, flutter of interest from your family and little bits from local news as well. But, it wasn't too bad. But mostly, I had the training on the Wednesday and the Friday night, so that was, and the Monday night, of course. So that allowed us to, settle down and get ready for the game. '84 grand final, we were set to go. We'd won 9 games in a row. We had our tails up. We had great belief in ourselves. The forward line was functioning pretty well at that stage. We had Peter Bardol, I know, who was like a really, really agile 6'4". He was going really well in the forward line, basically unstoppable. The back line was young and would hold together well, and in the midfield we had a really good midfield. We had Terry Walsh. He'd come down from Morty Alex, so he played in the centre, and he was one of those guys who you could give the ball to and he would get a handball out, a really good handball. So he would set players up, so we could play from the middle. If I could get the ball to him, he could get the ball to somebody, and we were off. We were into attack straight away, and we played a lot of footy like that. And then the way that the grand final turned out, that's how it turned out as well. We started the grand final. We'd clear the ball down. Walshy would get the ball, flick a handball out to one of the Rovers or halfback players running past who'd kick it forward. Peter Boyd was playing full forward. He's kicked like 2 or 3 goals because we'd made some positional moves that day that caught the opposition out, and one of them I think was having Boydie play down there. And so we kicked the first 3 goals of the game. They attacked and they'd kick a few points, and what I think happened was they did kick a lot of points, and we'd kicked those 4 or 5 goals in the first quarter. And by halfway through the first quarter, because we were so keen on attacking, we'd run to attack, but then they attacked a lot as well, and I reckon we tired ourselves out. Was, in reflection on the game, because they were kicking a lot of points, so we were going running down, trying to do a lot of defending, force it through for a point, and towards the end of the first quarter, we'd run out of legs a little bit. So we tried to refresh the team. I remember I went down to the forward line to give me a break from the ruck. Boydie went off for a rest. The ruckman, I think it was John Kenter, came on to play in the ruck. And that, it helped us a little bit, but it was really, we were just hanging out for quarter time. I think it was one of those young, enthusiastic teams that just gives it everything they've got in the first quarter. And we went in okay. We were 5-6. So at quarter time, things were okay. We dominated the first half of the quarter, and then they'd obviously come back and kick 6 goals in the last 15 minutes. And so, they'd shown that they were a great team. And then the second quarter just didn't work out for us at all. We really struggled, couldn't get a hold of the ball. I think that in hindsight, we were the team that was, won the 9 games, to sneak into 4th position, to win the first semi, to win the prelim, to get into the grand final, versus the team that had played in the grand final and won the year before. So they're reigning premiers, going into a season where they had a structure and had, a way of playing, I guess, that was proven. They fell back on that in the grand final. And we did regroup at half-time, and then in the last half we were able to, get back in the game, at least to put score on the board and to keep some pressure on. But in hindsight, if you looked at it by half-time, it was probably, they had control of the game. And we did well to get back into it, to at least kick, 2 or 3 goals in the third quarter and 2 or 3 goals in the last quarter, so that we had a competitive second half, which certainly the second quarter wasn't like that. It finished, and it was just, we had gone in certain that we were going to win. And the first 15 minutes gave us evidence to say that, that's how it was going to go. And then after that, it all went downhill. And so, of course, at the end of the game, it was, players were really, really feeling that there'd been a failure and that we'd, struggled. And even the fact that we didn't deliver for the 4 quarters, when you reflect on a game, that really disappointed us, that we'd let that slip in the second quarter. Josh was first-year coach for us, so he was of the same mind, I would imagine. He came and would have, we were convinced that we were going to go in and win it, but obviously it didn't turn out that way. And then, years later, I ran into a few Preston players and had a chat to them about the game, and they were really blown away by the way we started, because they hadn't seen us as a threat. They weren't planning to play us in the grand final. We were the team that was 5th or 6th and somehow snuck in at the end of the season. And so they went in and were a bit surprised by us, but when they speak about it, they then had confidence that they knew what they were doing, and that's the way the game unfolded. So unfortunately, what could have been one of the great days was still significant, and it was significant for all the players that played. I mean, you'd much rather play than not get to a grand final, so it was significant for us, but it was really took its toll, and took us a while to recover from the end of that. But it probably did set us up to say, well, we're now one of the top teams, which we hadn't been in 80, 81, 82, 83, we hadn't been one of the top teams, but we were now quite obviously a top team because we've made the grand final. So that helped us then for the next probably 10 years. Maybe that one had changed the mindset of Frankston Footy Club to say, well, we are up with the top bunch. And so from then on, we made lots of finals for probably the next 10 years after that. Well, I was in an era where there were fantastic big ruckmen playing for a lot of the other opposition teams. So at Preston we had Harold Martin, Port Melbourne, big Vic Anderson played in the ruck, and they also had Stephen Allender, who was completely different. Vic was a really big, strong, and Stephen Allender was tall, could run. So they were a combination that was difficult to take on for sure. And then Kim Kershaw, Barry Round at both of those were at Williamstown. So that was good challenges there. There was Kevin Sims, who was some big guy down at Sandringham, big sort of huge chested, really strong. So they were all 6'5" or so, and usually quite solid, the old traditional ruckman that sort of walked, jogged around the ground, and used their body a lot. So they were all pretty tough opponents. And it was great to play against them, actually, because then that was a challenge for a shorter, agile ruckman to play against the big, strong, stocky ruckman. So those sorts of efforts went on for years. It was great because I played against them, from 80, 79, 80, 81, 82, 83. Most of them were still there in 84. Jeff Austin was there at Preston a little bit later on. So a lot of them stayed, and so we'd play each other again and again and again, and that was great because it made for great rivalry. And it's one of the things I really do reflect on. It was you knew who you were playing, you played them before, and it was game on. Both players were really important, as most teams are. The ruckman's really important to the team. And so it was, a real contest between myself and whoever had played on the opposition. Coaching-wise, when I left Frankston and went to Mafra, I was originally approached to go and coach Mafra, but living in the city, it just wasn't going to happen. And so I told them that I would come up and be assistant coach, but they'd have to find themselves a coach. And then we were I reckon we were really lucky because Daryl Cunningham, ex-St Kilda Essendon, he came and coached Mafra. And so I was able to support him. Daryl was really good with teaching the guys, good mood he could set, good enthusiasm, and then I could add a couple of plays into the mix as well. And so we were pretty successful there and made finals for the 2 years and made a grand final that we only lost by a point. The funny thing was we lost, not funny, but we lost by a point to Leongatha, and that was at the end of 89. And so then I was out. I said to Mafra, look, I'm going to go and look for a coaching job. They were going, yeah, go with our blessing. So I had a look around, and the best opportunity that was available to me was an approach made to me by Leongatha, who had just beaten us in the grand final by a point. And so I went and met with them, and they were very keen to get me to come and coach them. And so I agreed to do that, which was a bit of a watershed moment in, for Latrobe Valley to go from one club to another. But the guys at Mafra were really good, and Adrian Gravener, who was the president there, I remember him saying that he understood he'd done something similar when he had finished playing and then went and coached an opposition team. And so I went and coached Leongatha for a couple of years. That had some success, made a grand final but lost. So I'd started to develop this, we made a grand final and lost, and this has happened to me twice now. So I coached there for a couple of years, and then came back to coach Edithvale Aspendale. Edithvale Aspendale was at that stage in trouble, didn't have a lot of money. It was 92 and players had left the club, and so I went back to try to coach the club, keep the best half a dozen players, and try to, you know, help some of the young players come along. And I did that for a year, coaching, and then at the end of that year, we'd survived. And I told the club, look, I don't think I'm actually the right person to take you to a winning formula. I think they needed someone that was connected on the peninsula, that could recruit players that, you know, knew, because I'd been away up the country for a few years. But I agreed to keep playing with them, and so I played with them for another couple of years. And they recruited a guy who was able to, you know, a local guy who could recruit a few players. What I did coaching-wise though, which turned out to be a fantastic move, was go and Greg Hutchison was coaching the Stingrays, Southern Stingrays, and so that was the under-18 team, and he'd invited me to come and be the ruck coach for a couple of years. So I did that, and the great thing there was that the ruckman that I was to coach was Jeff White, and so history goes on to show at the end of that 2 years he was #1 draft pick, picked up, and went on to play a couple hundred games with Melbourne, my old team, so it was a nice connection to have been involved in a small way in helping him and the footy club get back on track at Melbourne. And then at the end of '94 I went and coached Parkdale. It was really probably the major coaching stint for me. I coached them for 3 years. We made grand finals each year. We won a premiership there. We had sensational players. The club was, you know, really well supported. It was just a really successful time. Everyone was happy, and when we still have reunions now to celebrate the premierships, and not just the premierships, but just those years where we made grand finals every year. You know, all the players remember that pretty fondly. Then at the end of my time there, I'd done 3 years. I thought, I'll see what's happening, and so I went in and rung Greg Hutchinson, who had been the coach at the Stingrays, who'd got me to do some ruck coaching, had actually just been the Melbourne Football Club coach. And so I rang him to see whether I could get something in at Melbourne. And so that was good. So luckily enough, I was able to go in there and be assistant coach to Chris Fagan, who was coaching Melbourne Reserves at the time. That was a great experience for me to spend that year being an assistant to the reserves coach, but it still gave you an insight into the professionalism of how an AFL club runs. So that was a really great year. And Neil Danaher, that was his first year. Hutchie didn't keep the job as coach. He stayed on though, and Neil Danaher was in his first year as Melbourne coach. Gary Lyon was captain. You know, they were really quite a successful team. So it was really good to see that happening at that time. And then the AFL was changing, the seconds were disappearing, and so I decided it was time to leave, and St Bede's Mentone, I'd been a St Bede's student, you know, many years, 20 years before, and so they asked me to come and coach the St Bede's Mentone Football Club. So I went and coached them for 2 years. That would have been from 99, 2000, and then that was the end of my coaching career. I did actually, I did then go and coach ruckman for Spider Kennedy, who was coaching Dandenong, which was then Sandringham Dragons, so another under-18 team, and Spider Kennedy had been team manager for Greg Hutchison when I coached Whitey at the Stingrays. He was now coach of Sandy Dragons, and so he asked me, and I went down and helped him out for probably 2 or 3 years, just coaching their ruckman on an ad hoc basis. And that was the time for me to say goodbye to football, coaching and all the rest of it. And that was sort of, you know, by 2004 or 5, it was all over for me. All right, well, it's interesting question, because at the time you just play footy, you know, you don't, it's just what you do. I guess when I look back at it now, one of the things that I came back when they opened the new club rooms here, and it was interesting, you know, chatting to John Davis, I think, who's the upstairs is named after him, the upstairs bar there. And he was going, yeah, I remember going to your house for, you know, a party after one of the away games. We'd drop in there on the way home, and it does make you realise that the club has a lot of people who've put in, you know, see it as their hub and see it as their community. And that's something that probably, for me, when I look back on it, it certainly was my community when I was playing here. And then when you leave, you go and play for some other clubs, you get involved in other communities. I then spent time, you know, raising a family, you know, there's your most important community. But it is nice now, this is 30 years later, to be able to actually, you know, maybe 40 if I started as a 19-year-old, to be able to say, yeah, I can still go to that club and I still know some of the people there. Some of the people that were here when I was playing in 1977 to 87 are still here today. And so that's great to have that sort of place where you can go and you go, yeah, you know, that's the people I was with. The ground being in this, you know, basically the same ground, the way the grandstand was reinstated, those things are quite important, because then when you come back, you go, yeah, I recognise that place. Lots of people lose that because their club folds or it changes grounds or everything's completely redeveloped, and so you don't get even the physical symbols of when you were there years ago. You don't see any of them anymore. But I can come back here and some of the, you know, physically the symbols are still here, the grandstand's here, you know, best ground in the competitions here, and some of the people that were around, you know, when I played here are here as well. And so, yeah, from that point of view, it's a really significant part of my, you know, history.